The supply wagon came in late on a Tuesday in September, trailing a thin column of dust that the wind took west before it settled. Dunore Crossing was not a town that expected much from Tuesdays. It sat at the junction of two dirt roads in the middle of the Saskatchewan plain, far enough from the CPR line that everything arrived late and cost more than it should. A grain elevator at one end of the main street, a general store at the other, a church whose bell rope had rotted through the previous winter and had not been replaced between them, a blacksmith, a livery, a post office that shared its front room with a feed merchant who had retired but not left. There was only one passenger on the wagon. She stepped down from the seat before the driver had fully stopped, which he noticed and did not comment on. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and held a flat leather case against her side, in a way that suggested she had been holding it exactly like that for the better part of 2 days. She was perhaps 30, perhaps a little older, and she had the particular quality of someone who knew exactly how much a thing weighed before she picked it up. The driver set a battered trunk in the dust beside her, said something about the connecting road to Swift Current, and left without waiting to see if she'd heard him. She stood on the street and looked at it, not the trunk, the town. She looked the length of the main street the way a person looks at a room they are about to rearrange, not with judgment, but with assessment. The kind of looking that measures without a tape. The grain elevator's east corner post had moved. She could see it from here if you knew where to look. 2 inches, maybe a little less. The well housing beside the livery leaned 3 degrees from true. The church steps had a soft spot on the left side. She could tell by the way the board had bowed. A man was coming toward her. He walked the way people walk when they have already decided something, and the distance is the only thing left to cover. His right hand was wrapped in cotton from the base of his thumb to his wrist and bound with a strip of flannel. He held the arm slightly away from his body, not dramatically, just the way a man holds a limb when one part of it has stopped being available. He stopped in front of her trunk. He looked at it, then at her. She looked back at him. He said, "I put a notice at the store in Moose Jaw. Cook and general help, 2 weeks, through the end of harvest, room in the house." She had been thinking about the notice the whole 2 days on the wagon, the way she thought about everything, laid flat, turned over, tested for weight, a job as stated, then whatever was underneath it. "What's the wage?" she said. He told her it was fair. She picked up one end of her trunk. He picked up the other with his left hand, his wrapped right held close. They carried it across the street together without speaking, while Mrs. Calder in the general store doorway watched with the particular stillness of someone who had already decided she would form an opinion about this and was simply collecting her material. The house had 2 stories and the windward face of a building that had not been caulked in 3 winters. She could feel the draft through the parlor wall when she ran her hand along the baseboard. She did not say so. The kitchen was at the back, south-facing and adequate. Flour, lard, dried beans, side pork, a sack of oats that had been turned against weevils. She took a mental inventory the way she took all inventories, once completely and not again. A boy appeared in the doorway. He was 8 or 9 slight, with his father's same quality of stillness. He stood with one hand on the doorframe and looked at her, not with the open curiosity of a child who had been encouraged to ask, but with the more contained attention of a child who had learned that watching was reliable where asking sometimes wasn't. She didn't turn to look at him directly. She kept measuring out flour. "The crew takes breakfast at 6, she said. "Do you eat with them or in the house?" Pause. His voice, when it came, was careful, the voice of a child who had not used it much recently. "In the house." "In the house, then," she said. "All right." He stayed in the doorway a moment longer. Then she heard his boots on the stairs. She finished the bread, set it to rise, and went outside to find the well. The well pulley was the first thing she noted. The rope was sound enough, but the wooden drum had cracked along its grain on the weather side, and someone had looped a length of wire around it to hold it together. The wire had bitten into the wood. Another month of use, and it would cut through entirely. She turned the drum once with her palm, feeling the resistance. She took the measurement of the problem and stored it, The way she stored everything, without sentiment and without forgetting. Then she drew the bucket up, filled the pail, and went back inside to start the morning's work. She cooked for 8 men for 6 days. She made bread every other day. She kept a pot of soup on the back of the stove each noon. She learned the schedule of the threshing crew, who ate fast and who sat, who took 2 cups of coffee and who took 3, without asking anyone to tell her. She simply watched and adjusted. Ken. On the 4th morning, she was awake before 4 o'clock. The house was dark. She dressed in the dark, as she had learned to do long before she came to this country, in a city where the windows faced east and the light came too early to be wasted on practical things. She took the tools she needed from her canvas bag: a handsaw, a chisel, a short length of oak dowel she had kept from a broken chair rung in moose jaw because the grain was right. The yard was cold and frost-silvered, and the sky was the specific dark blue that comes just before the dark begins to ease. She set her lantern on the well housing and began. The repair required removing the wire, splitting out the cracked section cleanly, fitting the dowel as a new core and reassembling. Perhaps 40 minutes. She worked without hurrying. Hurrying was how you turned a 40-minute repair into a problem that needed another 40 minutes on top of it, and then someone else's 40 minutes after yours. Her father had said this to her once and never repeated it, which meant he considered it worth saying exactly once. She was driving the last peg when the boy appeared. She had not heard him. One moment the yard was empty, and then he was standing 6 feet away in his coat and boots and bare head, watching. She set the mallet down. He said, "What's wrong with it?" The drum cracked. If it split, you'd lose the rope. He came closer and looked at the repair. He pressed his thumb against the new wood, testing the seam. "My father knows how to do that," he said. "Most people who keep a farm do. He can't right now, his hand." "I know." He was quiet a moment, then, "Can I hold the lantern?" She handed it to him. He held it without shifting, keeping it exactly where it needed to be, while she drove the last 2 pegs and checked the drum's rotation. He had the steadiness of a child who understood the difference between being useful and being in the way. When she was done, she set the tools back in her bag, in the order she would need them next. "It'll hold now," she said. He looked at the drum. He turned it once with his palm, the way she had turned it. "Till spring," he said. "Past spring," she said, "unless someone takes a wire to it again." He looked at her then, not the drum, her, the particular look of a child recalibrating something. They went inside. She started the fire for breakfast. He sat at the kitchen table and did not go back upstairs. She had seen the church steps on her 3rd day in Dunore crossing. Walking back from the creek with a pail of water, she had gone the long way without meaning to, and she had noticed. The bottom 2 steps were soft, not visibly rotting. No one had pulled them apart to look, but soft the way wood goes soft when water has been getting in for 2 or 3 seasons, working up from ground contact, invisible until you pressed a boot heel down and felt the give. She had not gone back to look again. She did not need to. She had taken the measurement with her eye and her foot and stored it without writing it down. The Sunday before the harvest ended, she rose at 4 and went to the church. It was a small frame building, 1 room. The steps were the originals, perhaps 10 years old, given the look of the hardware, which put them 1 or 2 seasons past their useful life given the north exposure. She had the replacement boards under her arm. She had cut them 2 evenings before from a length of spsu in the man's woodshed, straight-grained and dry. She pried the old steps out with the flat bar, careful with the hardware. She set the new boards, fitted the risers, drove the screws. Clean work, unhurried, done before the sky had gone from gray to proper daylight. She was packing her tools when she heard boots on the road. The woman who kept the post office stopped. She was tall, somewhere in her 50s, with the face of someone who had learned not to form conclusions until all the evidence was present. She looked at what had been done. She looked at the person who had done it. Neither of them spoke. A crow crossed the road behind the woman and was gone. The woman said, "Who asked you to do this?" She said, "No one." The woman set 1 foot on the bottom step and put her weight on it. Nothing moved. She pressed harder. Nothing. Then she said, "I have coffee on." She said, "I have breakfast to start." The woman nodded once, the nod of a person who has heard something reasonable and cannot argue with it. Then she went back the way she'd come. She picked up her bag of tools and walked back to the farm. On the 11th day, it rained. Not a hard rain, the slow, patient kind that settled in before first light and gave no indication of stopping before evening. The threshing crew stayed in the bunkhouse. The machine sat under its tarpaulin. The field went quiet. She came down at her usual hour, started the stove, set the bread to rise, and then, because there was no meal to build toward for 2 hours and the kitchen was warm, she brought her leather case to the table and opened it. She had been watching the grain elevator for over a week. The corner post on the east face had moved, perhaps 2 inches from plumb, no more. No one would notice from the road, not this season. But the elevator was 30 feet tall, and that post was set in ground that froze 8 months of the year and heaved when it thawed. 2 inches this autumn was the beginning of a conversation that would end badly in 3 or 4 years if no one answered it now. She had paced the dimensions twice on separate mornings. She had measured the degree of lean by eye and cross-referenced it against the roof line. Her father's method, from before he owned a proper level. Put the roof line against the sky and see what's true. She was still learning, she was always learning, but she had learned enough. She was drawing the repair sequence, new base plate, sister post, bracing pattern, when she heard him come in from the back. She did not close the notebook. He came through with his coat still on, rain dark at the shoulders. He set something on the far counter. He crossed to the work table for a nail set he'd left there the previous day. He stopped. She kept the pencil moving. Her father had said the pencil version cost nothing to get wrong. You made all your mistakes in pencil and none of them in timber. She had agreed with him then and agreed with him still. He stood without moving for what might have been 3 seconds or 10. She could not have said. Then he reached past her, not over, beside, arm extended without touching, and moved the oil lamp from the wall bracket to the table, closer to where she was working. The circle of light widened across the open pages. He went back to his end of the table with the nail set. The rain went on outside. The lamp burned steady. She turned to the next page and kept drawing. The boy, whose name was Tobias, began coming to breakfast earlier. Not to help exactly, though he did help, quietly, setting things down without being asked, but with the quality of someone who had decided a place was worth getting to before it began. She noticed this without remarking on it. On the 13th day's day, he came out to find her before breakfast. She was checking the fence posts along the north paddock, pressing each one at the base to test the set, noting in her mind the 3 that would need resetting before the ground froze hard. He fell in beside her without asking. He was wearing his father's old vest over his coat, too large for him, the way children wear things that belong to someone they are trying to stay close to. She pressed the next post. Good. How do you know which ones are bad? He said. The ground tells you, she said. If there's give, the frost has been working at the base. If there's no give, it's still solid. He pressed the next post himself, then the next. He had the right instinct for it. Not too hard, just enough to feel what was there. He stopped at one. This one, he said. She tested it herself. He was right. Yes, she said, that one. He moved to the next. They went along the fence line in the gray early light, alternating. She let him find 2 more before the yard sounds from the bunkhouse told her the crew was waking. Breakfast, she said. He went ahead of her toward the house. At the porch steps, he turned back. The 3rd post from the gate, he said. That one needs it too. She hadn't tested that one yet. She looked at it from where she stood. The way the ground sat at its base, the particular flatness of soil that had been pushed. You're right, she said. He went inside. She stood in the yard a moment, looking at the post. Then she went in and started breakfast. The crew left on a Friday. They were gone by afternoon, their wagons raising in a last low line of dust on the south road. She cooked a final dinner for the house. Salt pork, potatoes, a jar of preserved beans from the back of the pantry. 3 plates at the table, which felt like the right number. Tobias talked about the fence posts. He explained to his father with some precision the difference between a post that had give and one that was solid, and the method for testing. His father listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions. The boy answered them. After supper, Tobias cleared the plates without being asked and went upstairs. She heard his boots on the boards above, the familiar creak of the 3rd step, the one with the soft spot near the outside edge, the one she had been stepping around for 2 weeks without saying anything. She heard the man on the staircase. His boots stopped at the 3rd step. A pause. He went to his room. In the morning, she rose before light and did the repair she had been carrying in her head for 11 days. A cedar shim, fitted to the gap beneath the tread, 2 nails to hold it. 20 minutes. She tested the step with her full weight. Nothing. She went to start the fire. When he came down, she heard his boot find the repaired step. Solid, he did not mention it. He poured his coffee and stood at the window looking at the yard. After a moment, he said, "I'm going to Moose Jaw on Wednesday for the elevator materials." She said, "I know the dimensions." "I know you do," he said. "I thought you might want to come and check the lumberyard stock yourself." She looked at the coffee in her cup. The steam was going straight up, no draft. She had caulked the window above the kitchen sink 3 days ago with a paste of oil and sawdust, and it had held. "All right," she said. He drank his coffee. Tobias came down the stairs, his boot landing flat on the 3rd step without any correction, the step holding without a sound. He sat at the table and began eating before she had told him breakfast was ready, which meant he had decided this was a place where he did not need to wait to be told. She set the plate in front of him without comment. Outside the window, the sky was the pale gray of a cold morning that would warm by noon. The yard was frost-covered, the fence posts she had flagged standing in their row along the north paddock waiting. There were 11 days before. The ground froze hard enough to make post work difficult. She knew this without calculating it. She had been counting without meaning to, the way you count things that matter. She had not opened the trunk. The road to Moose Jaw ran straight through the middle of the plain, and the light in the late afternoon came in from the west at an angle that made the grass look like water. Silver and then gold and then silver again as the wind moved through it. She held the leather notebook on her knees and did not open it. The man drove and did not speak, and she was glad of the quiet, the specific quality of it. Not empty, not waiting to be filled, but settled, the way a room is settled when it has been lived in long enough to stop expecting furniture to be moved. At the lumber yard, she stood with the yard man and told him what she needed. The dimensions, the grade, the order in which the cuts should be made. He wrote it down without questioning any of it, because she spoke about wood, the way people speak about things they know, the way they know their own names. The man stood beside her with his hands in his pockets and listened. On the way back, she watched the prairie come in around them as the light fell. She had been watching this sky for 2 weeks and had learned the order the stars came in. The western ones first, then the cluster above the south tree line. Then all the rest at once, the whole enormous dark arriving the way it arrived out here. Completely, without transition, like a thing that had been waiting just past the edge of daylight. She had not opened the trunk. It sat at the end of the narrow cot in the room they had given her, south-facing, with a window that looked over the yard. The leather notebook was on the wooden crate beside the cot. A letter was inside the trunk, from her cousin in Winnipeg, dated 6 weeks prior, offering a room and a position in a tailor's shop on Portage Avenue. The cousin was a practical woman who meant the offer genuinely and would keep it open as long as she could, which was probably until the new year. She sat on the edge of the cot and thought about the trunk without opening it. Below her, through the floor, she heard the man moving in the kitchen, the particular sound of putting out a lamp, the small click of the chimney, the brief smell of smoke that reached even through the boards. A chair, then quiet. She had already written the letter to her cousin in her head on the road back from Moose Jaw. She had set it aside. What she had felt when she set it aside was not relief exactly, but the quieter thing that comes after relief. When a question you have been carrying finally stops asking itself because you have given it an answer. The screen door downstairs needed its spring adjusted. She had been meaning to look at it. She would look at it tomorrow. The next morning, Tobias was on the porch steps when she came out before breakfast. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, watching the north paddock with the easy, unhurried watchfulness of a child who had somewhere specific to be and was simply waiting for the right moment. He stood when she came through the door. "The post by the gate," he said. "Are we doing it today?" She looked at the yard. The frost was just beginning to lift in the first thin light. The post stood at the gate with its particular lean, patient, waiting to be addressed. "After breakfast," she said. He went inside ahead of her and set his own plate without being asked. Later that evening, she sat on the porch steps in the last of the light. The prairie went quiet around her, the wind dropping the way it dropped every evening out here. Suddenly, and all at once, as though it had somewhere else to be, the temperature was falling. She could feel it through her coat. The sky over the western plain was the long, slow amber of a September evening in Saskatchewan, which was its own specific color, the kind you did not find elsewhere and could not describe to anyone who had not seen it. She heard the door behind her. His boots on the boards. He sat on the step below hers, which put them almost level. He had 2 cups. He set one beside her on the step without asking whether she wanted it. She picked it up. The coffee was hot. She held it with both hands and looked out past the fence and the gate and the road to where the prairie opened up and went on until it reached the sky. The first star was out, low over the western horizon. Then a second, slightly north of the first. The screen door opened behind them, and Tobias looked out. He stood in the frame and looked at them and at the yard and at the first 2 stars and did not say anything. Then he let the door settle behind him and went back inside. The particular sound of a child who has seen what he came out to see and is satisfied. The man drank from his cup. She turned the collar of her coat up against the chill and looked at the second star, then the third, the cluster over the south tree line arriving in its usual order, and then all the rest at once. The whole enormous dark coming in over the prairie, the way it always came in, out here, without warning and without apology. Vast and cold and full of the kind of distance that stops feeling like loss once you have learned to breathe inside it. Both hands wrapped around the cup, the warmth of it against her palms. The trunk was in her room. She had not packed it. She was not going to. The stars came.